Chapter 5 continued. Back at the Harrowing house, after a full day of exploration, antics, and shenanigans, they all gathered at the kitchen table for their evening meal, which Kruger had prepared for them. Tonight, it was big, hot, healthy bowls of steaming vegetable stew. Yuck! What kid ever likes stew for dinner? Ever! "Soup's up, kids," wet-lipped Kruger declared, quite pleased with himself, passing around bowls of his culinary creation. As an afterthought, "Or perhaps it's stew." Melody implored with heaven, praying that their host had not talked to himself out loud while cooking in the kitchen, lest any liquid shrapnel had landed in the pot. Hubert looked down into the murky depths of the watery, tomatoey red swill swirling around in his oversized bowl. Impossibly large chunks of bland, unpeeled potato and mushy cooked tomatoes protruded up like soggy islands in a sea of hell. How was he ever supposed to get through all of this? "This sucks," muttered Tarzan to himself, head down, hands dropped to his sides, no motivation whatsoever to bother reaching for his utensils. "I beg your pardon?" Dad's voice came from the head of the table. "Nothin'," replied Tarzan meekly. Then, switching his tone, "And how did you all get on today?" Dad asked keenly. "You must have some exciting tales to tell?" Melody cheerfully filled her dad in, telling him all about the strong bull they'd seen, some of the village folk they'd met, and the nice beach they'd played at. "You have to be careful with bulls," Dad cautioned. "They can be very territorial." Between delicious mouthfuls of stew loaded with nutrients, he explained, Some people have been known to get into serious trouble hopping fences and walking into a field full of cows. If there happens to be a bull in the field at the same time, it can be extremely dangerous." While his dad and his sister chatted away to everyone, Hugo took advantage of the distraction. Using his fork braced against the side of the crockery, he leveraged a large hunk of boring potato from his bowl. As discreetly as possible, he hid it under the table, clutched in his right hand. Then, without looking down, he quietly plopped the undesirable pomme de terre directly under Tar's chair. "Brilliant! No one suspects a thing," he triumphed within himself. Then, looking back in his bowl, "Ah, too many potatoes! Gonna have to try another." And with that first success, he proceeded to sneak as many unwanted spuds as he could, relocating them into Tarzan's care until at least half a dozen inedible objects lay scattered on the kitchen floor under his seat. Tarzan, oblivious to Hugo's naughty scheme, slowly set to work on figuring out how to even begin eating his food. He forced himself to pick up a spoon and ladle a sip of slurry into his mouth. Slurry is what the local farmers use to spray their fields with, a mixture of raw cow sewage. Unpleasant to say the least. He hesitated, closed his eyes tight, and slurped. Hot, tangy soup water went burning down his throat. He put down his spoon to recover. Looking around the table, no one else seemed to be having any trouble with their food. He then tried the classic trick of not breathing through his nose while biting into a strikingly uninteresting vegetable in order to not have to taste it. "Give me chips any day," he thought wistfully, pinching his nose tight. "You know, real food." As far as he was concerned, this was a miserable concoction designed by grown-ups to cause lasting trauma to every young child at mealtimes. An eternity later, dinner was more or less finished. It was time for chores. Dad delegated to the kids their responsibilities. Everyone is to help clear the table. Hubert is on dishes, Tarzan drying, and Melody will wipe the table and sweep the floor. Dad and Kruger left the kids to it, retiring to a more comfortable sitting room for some boring adult conversation. "Probably talking about politics or something Snoresville like that," said Huey to the others, filling up the big sink with hot soapy water. Melody, sweeping away with a long broom, came to Tarzan's chair and pulled it aside, revealing a graveyard of discarded veg. "Tar," she said, shocked. "What's this? You didn't eat all your dinner." Dish towel in hand, Tarzan spun round. "What are you talking about? I had to force myself through every mouthful of that tedious slop," he defended himself. "Well, how do you explain all of that?" She pointed under the table. Throwing the damp towel over his shoulder, he left the rack and came over for a closer look. Spying the incriminating frame-up job, he shouted, "That's not mine!" They both turned and looked at Hugo hunched over the sink, his back towards them. The guilty party conveniently focused on doing the dishes. Doo-dee-doo. After everyone had adequately completed their after-dinner chores and the kitchen was reasonably tidied up, the kids found Dad and Kruger sitting in the study with a glass of ruby port by a cozy peat moss fire burning in the fireplace. The adults had been relaxing contentedly, chatting quietly with each other. With their bellies full, dessert wine in hand, and warm firelight flicking off of old bookshelves, it was a fine way to rest on holiday. "Everything all sorted in there?" Dad asked when he saw his kids peering in through the doorway. They nodded with unnecessary enthusiasm, as if attempting to convince him that there was no need to go back and double-check. The boys recalled their haste during their wash-up/drying duties. Surely he wouldn't find any crusty, half-dirty dishes or wet cups still dripping with soap suds in the cupboards. "Can we go play now?" the boys blurted out, then bolted down the hall before waiting for a response. "Just a minute," Dad called after them, but it was too late. Sigh. "Have fun, Mel," he smiled weakly, his daughter still standing at the door. She went in to give her dad a quick kiss on the cheek before hastily trying to find the boys. In doing so, she noticed the old-fashioned picture frame on the coffee table Kruger had been showing to her dad. It contained an old photograph of what she assumed was a family posing in front of the Harrowing house. It was by no means a black and white, but judging by the vintage style and the clothes the folk were wearing, she could tell it was still very dated. Was that Kruger when he was much younger? She wondered to herself. And who was that pretty lady next to him? Kruger slowly got up out of his seat, put the frame back on the mantelpiece where it belonged, and then sat back down again. Something about his mannerism appeared a bit awkward and uncomfortable. "Keep them out of trouble," Dad winked at her, and then turned to resume speaking with their host. Hugo and Tarzan, rather enthused to continue where they'd left off the night before, had temporarily escaped Dad interfering with their fun. They couldn't wait to explore more of the big house. They hastened their way further down the first-floor hallway and around to the back-end part of the house unfamiliar to them. Passing many large framed family portraits on the walls and closed doors with skeleton key locks, they slowed down as they came to one door on the right, blocked off by yellow and black striped hazard tape. A simple white sign with bold black letters was posted at eye level. "Do not enter. Renovations in progress." What are two young children wandering around in a stranger's home to do? Obey the sign and go find somewhere else to play? Obviously. But no, not these two. They decided to try the handle. Naturally. It opened. Of course. "What's inside?" whispered Tarzan, hands on the back of Hugo's shoulders as he lifted the restricting tape and poked his head in. "It's dark," Hugo's voice came back, sounding slightly distant as he cautiously stepped inside the room. "Hold up! Where's Mel?" Tarzan had stopped, looking back down the deserted hallway they'd both come from, realizing Melody had been left behind. "Hugo!" There was no answer. "Hugo?" Hubert had been busy searching for a light switch, but nothing was working. His eyes had not had time to adjust to the darkness as he worked his way towards the center of the room. If there was anything worth admiring, it remained obscured from sight, including the small heavy rug on the floor he was about to step on. As soon as the weight of his foot came down upon it, it collapsed beneath him. The rug had been covering a sizable opening in the floor, and as Hubert fell into it, the rug seemed to wrap itself around his body. Hubert yelped as he was swallowed whole, finding himself sliding fast down a large slanting ventilation shaft. Tarzan, hearing the noise, went into the room to see what was going on. The rectangular shaft of light streaming in through the open doorway behind him revealed no one there but his elongated shadow, and a gaping hole in the floor in front of him. Hollow metallic clunks and bumps could be felt echoing from somewhere down below as Hugo crashed along his tin slide. "Help me!" he heard his friend hollering faintly from far away and well out of reach. Tarzan turned and ran back out of the room in search for Melody. Sensing some sort of commotion, Kruger quietly excused himself as Dad continued to appreciate watching the fire burning. Without looking up, Dad casually raised his nearly finished glass to his host, allowing him to go investigate what kind of mischief his children might be getting themselves into. Kruger shuffled straight for his private office. He pulled the skeleton key from his housecoat pocket and fiddled with the lock. Then, realizing he must have left it unlocked the night before, he entered, flicked on the nearest monitor, and observed it closely. With an amused grunt at the scene it portrayed, he turned and left the room, heading further along the hall to the stairs for the basement. Wondering how far the boys had gone on ahead, Melody took a moment to inspect a few rooms, thinking they might have gone in to explore any number of them. Most were typically large, a couple rather grand halls, while some weren't very big at all. She looked briefly through bedrooms, storage closets, studies, a library, and another sitting room. Not finding them anywhere, and worrying they might have accidentally missed each other in passing, she came out into the hallway again. This time she thought she heard someone. Walking quickly, she came to some stairs off to her side, which she was sure descended to the basement. She called down to see if anyone could hear her. "Huey, Tar, is that you? Are you down there?" After listening for a short moment, she decided to go ahead and make her way down, hoping she might catch up with them. Meanwhile, Hubert's ride came to an abrupt end as he flew out of an opening in a wall. Smothered safely in his rug, he bashed straight into the edge of a solid wooden work table cluttered with dusty, old-fashioned tools. With a violent whiplash, Hubert landed hard, rusty handsaws, hammers, and hardware joining him, crashing noisily all over the floor, eventually rolling to a full stop. A moment passed. Flipping a flap of rug off of his face, he lay there wide-eyed and speechless. He itched his nose. Staring blindly up at the ceiling he assumed was there, he wondered where he was. All was silent. It was apparent Tarzan had not followed after him. With a groan, he rolled out of the rug, carefully pushed himself to his feet, and peered around. Eventually, his eyes accustomed themselves to the darkening twilight filtering in through small, high windows above ground level. He was in the basement. Judging by the tools all over the ground, he assumed he was in some kind of a workshop. There was an ancient furnace in one corner of the room, some shelves covered with cobwebs, and more tools he didn't recognize, plus multiple tins spilling over with assorted bolts, nails, and screws never to be used again. Some makeshift sawhorses were stacked one on top of the other, and a broken wheelbarrow laid propped back against the wall nearby. As he continued to nose around, brushing the occasional cobweb from his head, he spotted a solid door at the far end of the room. It was then that his ears pricked to the sound of footsteps drawing closer and closer from somewhere outside the room. He paused mid-step, his balance wavering in his sudden attempt at motionlessness, as if playing a game of freezing statues and didn't want to get caught out. His eyes remained intent on the door. The footsteps outside suddenly stopped. Hugo held his breath, waiting nervously. He wasn't sure how anyone would react if he was found here all by himself. He still hadn't cleared up the big mess he'd made of tools scattered all over the floor. There was a quiet cough beyond, and then the doorknob turned. Inwards, the door slowly creaked open. And to his relief, his sister stepped in. Yay! Tarzan was unsuccessful in finding Melody. Where the fruit flies is she? He wondered. The house was quiet. Dad and that weird Kruger guy must be still chatting, or they've gone to the rooms for the night. What he did find, however, was the door to the mysterious office, which, unbeknownst to him, Hugo had discovered the night before. Tarzan looked up at the sign marked Private and automatically tried the doorknob. Yep, it's open. There's a surprise. Tarzan made sure no one was looking before sneaking in to discover the desk and control panel that Hugo had played around with. Cool, he thought to himself as he pulled up the massive office chair, sat, and then took a spin. Whee! His outstretched legs bonked the corner of the desk mid-turn, disrupting his game. Ouch! Then, looking up at one of the screens, he was amazed to see Hugo and Mel interacting in black and white. There was no audio, so he watched them with fascination as they silently gesticulated to each other, trying to explain what had happened. Tarzan's fidgeting hand came across a lever. He decided to pull on it. Huh, I wonder what this does. Are you okay? Melody asked her brother, hearing all about how he'd fallen through a hole in the floor upstairs somewhere. Hugo was relieved to see his sister. Yeah, I'm fine, he reassured her, rubbing his forehead where he'd smacked hard into the work table during his rapid entrance into the room. Melody was standing near one of the storage shelves built right into the stone wall. Just then, there was a strange grating noise, like stone upon stone. The wall swiftly pivoted, and Melody was whisked right along with it into a dark, unknown passage beyond. Unfortunately, some of her lovely long hair got caught in the gap as the wall closed tightly behind her. Melody stood uncomfortably in the pitch black, reaching behind her to hold onto her hair, her head being held captive at an awkward angle. She could hear her muffled brother calling to her from the other side of the wall. Mel, are you okay in there? What just happened? I can't move, she replied, barely audible through the thick stone. Hold on, her brother encouraged. He felt around the wall where the shelf used to be, looking for some kind of latch or device that might swing the wall back around, hopefully bringing his sister with it. Nothing, except for his sister's long hair poking generously between where the two walls met. He suddenly had an idea. He ran back to the worktop and picked up one of the old saws lying on the floor. Testing the jagged teeth with his thumb like he'd seen his dad do once, it would have to do. Hurrying back, with his free hand, he picked up the length of hair hanging limply through the tight crack. I'm gonna get you out, he shouted through the wall, naively placing the rusted blade on his sister's beautiful hair. Gripping the ancient dull tool firmly in one hand and pulling her hair taut with the other, he went to work. Back and forth he sawed, gnawing away, attempting to cut his sister free. It was far from a smooth operation. Matted hair snaggled hopelessly in multiple blunt teeth. On the other side of the wall, Melody didn't feel very much, merely a gentle vibration to her skull. "What's going on out there?" she asked, starting to feel a bit concerned. She had no idea what her dear brother was doing to her. At last it came free, and Huey stood there breathing hard, triumphantly holding a fistful of damaged hair. But his victory was short-lived, as it dawned on him that his sister was no closer to being loosed from her trap. Oh, Huey said in dismay, dropping the tool with a clatter. Poor Melody's hair was still caught firmly between the walls, strands of it still remaining, albeit this time much shorter now and sticking out at unflattering angles. Tarzan had seen the whole thing. He was aghast. He had tugged frantically back and forth on the lever and pressed multiple buttons to no avail. The wall had not shifted, and his darling Mel was being butchered by her not-so-helpful brother. He panicked and ran from the room before anyone found out, heading straight upstairs to his bedroom where he pretended nothing had happened. Poor Melody was getting tired from standing for so long in such an unnatural position. "Huey, can you please go get some help?" she pleaded. Her brother hadn't heard her. He was busy grabbing for the wheelbarrow leaning close by. He'd desperately come up with his second stupid idea of the night. He planned to ram it into the wall with the intention of trying to dislodge any loose stone. Yeah, that'll work. Not. Hubert pulled at the two rubber green handles of the barrow. What he didn't realize was that the barrow was actually fixed into position. The wheel itself was some kind of gear, and when he pulled on the arms, the gear rotated, affecting some mechanism connected underground. With a grating squeak, Melody and the shelf came swiveling halfway back into view, exposing the long, dark tunnel behind her. Huey stood staring with awe into the blackness beyond. Melody stood staring with dismay at her brutally chopped hair. "I wonder where this leads," Huey said, raising his voice and listening to it echo back at him. "Leads," he called out again. "Leads, leads, eads. Echo, 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 echo. Hello, 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 hello. Can anybody hear me? Hear me, hear me, hear me. Yo mama's a bloated brontosaurus, 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 brontosaurus." "Huey," Mel started. Melody, grateful to be released from the cold grip of the rotatable shelf wall, could hardly summon the energy to scold her younger brother. His sudden rudeness was not entirely unexpected. She was accustomed to her weird brother's ways and understood that boys in their innocence can be quite silly sometimes, or perhaps most of the time. They are so not like girls. Perhaps that's why boys can be so amusing to her and rather endearing. Besides, she just wanted to head back and find their way upstairs again. Just then, the faint sound of their dad calling their names came floating down somewhere from the upper floor. "Hubert! Tarzan! Melody!" "I think it's time for bed," she told her brother. "We can always come back in the morning." Reluctantly, Huey finished off entertaining himself. Pushing the wheelbarrow levers back into place to close up the wall, the tunnel became hidden once again. He then followed his sister out of the room in search of the stairs. Melody walked on ahead, sadly stroking her wounded hair. Further along, behind a closed storage closet door, Kruger was nearly finished what he was doing. He wasn't sure he would get to the children in time, but, being host of the Harrowing house, he was used to having families exploring about and getting themselves into mischief of some sort or another. He had swapped his house slippers for a large pair of rubber wellies, and then donned a dark hooded cloak, fastening it securely under his chin. Lifting an old lantern hanging from a nail in the wall, he then found some dry matches stored in a drawer. When the lantern was lit, he did a final check to ensure he had everything he needed. Eventually, he exited the room and headed for his workshop. Upon entering, he held the lantern high and surveyed the area. No kids. Observing his tools littered all over the floor, he slowly shook his head. Then, with a defeated shrug, he headed for the wheelbarrow leaning against the wall. Resting the lantern on the work table, he pulled at the wheelbarrow handles. As the mechanism engaged and the shelf in the wall spun round for the second time that evening, he retrieved his light source and entered the long, dark, creepy-looking tunnel. He had other things to attend to. To any onlooker hidden from view, the flickering light off the walls faded the further in Kruger went, while his ominous shadow grew. Bum, bum, bum.